Hey y'all! Well, it's time to do the Op Amp Shootout. And we went through some of these chip amps and we tried the AEMA A07 Max, which was, I think, kind of the start of this thing. And then we went to the A70, which I gave a great review for because it implemented this new type of feedback that really seems to clean up and bring some life to the sound that these chip amps have. And then with that one, putting the Sparkos Op Amps in it made a huge difference. So then I had the guys from Burson send me a pair of their new V7 Vivid Op Amps, and unfortunately they won't fit in that A70, and so that's not even an option. They're too tall, which that's one of the main differences, at least physically, between a Sparkos dual op amp and the Burson, is the Bursons are much taller and it limits what amplifiers they'll fit inside. So I was trying to think of a way to really do a good, legit review, and we've got, you know, the little IC op amp that these things come with, and then we've got the Burson V7 Vivid, and then we've got the Sparkos dual op amp. And so I went through these mono amps. We got the AEMA and we got these little Fozzy units. And I decided to go with these little Fozzy units because there's no tone controls. It's just, I mean, there's, you know, speaker jacks and an RCA jack. Well, it's got an XLR2, but we're going to be using the RCA jack and speaker jacks and power switch. That's it. So there's no, like, you know, possible adjustments that could be different. And then to go through the rest of the testing equipment or the gear that I'm using to test this with, I've got a Akai GX4000D reel-to-reel deck that got some nice high-end tape on, that I've got the same like 30 seconds of a song that I listen to through each amp back and forth several times. The track that I'm using was a Natalie Merchant song that, to me, the left and the right channels sound very similar. So it was a piece of music that could be used as a mono source and not sound weird. And so used one channel, the right channel, off the tape deck. Went with it too because it does have a volume control on the output, and we wouldn't be coloring the sound running it through some, you know, other type of preamp. All my preamps that I've got are some sort of a tube preamp, so I didn't want to have that in the equation. So we're running straight off the output of that reel-to-reel DAC, running at 7.5 IPS with some nice modern new tape that was recorded off of a 45 LP with a moving coil cartridge in my phono stage. So it's a really nice recording. Again, mono channel. We did this amp and then this amp. Now, the fun of using these two guys is I was able to put a chip or an op amp in one of these and then shuffle them around, put them on the shelf, let them sit for about a week. And if any of you are around my age, you'll relate to the fact that I had no idea which chip was in which amp. The amps are identical, didn't put any marks on them or anything, and then hooked them up to the system one at a time. Got nice 10 amp power bricks for them, so these things are going to perform as good as they're ever going to. And then I was listening through a Quad S2 speaker, which has a ribbon tweeter, super revealing, detailed speaker to be reviewing these op amps with. So the first test I did was one of them I left the stock little IC op amps in, and then I put the Burson Vivid in the other. And they will just barely clear the case on one of these Fozzy V3 monoblocks. So, what was my thought on that? The Burson versus the stock op amp was a pretty stark contrast. The Burson definitely had more detail. It sounded a lot less mushy, but it still had a fairly mellow presentation. It wasn't, I was kind of expecting it to be harsh, because if you look, it's got like a classic and the vivid in this Burson line, and they sent me the vivids, and I was a little concerned that it might be fatiguing or be like too, edgy, and it wasn't at all. But it was definitely a big step up from what these little IC chips sounded like. So overall, I was impressed. Just, the power seemed to be the same. I didn't have to mess with the gain on the input, so I don't know if that's a thing with these op amps or not, that there's different gains in them. I'm not that familiar with this technology, but this is a very subjective review. I didn't hook these things up to any kind of test gear, because what I'm listening for is going to be more like you would get from rolling tubes, and in my experience, the subtle changes that happen from doing that, you're not going to see on the measuring equipment that I have. It's not like it's going to be a 2 dB gain here or something like that. It's very subtle kind of stuff. So, between the stock chip and the Burson Vivid, yes, nice improvement. And if any of you guys have used the Burson op amps, I'm sure you'll agree that they did a good job bringing out some more clarity without making the amplifier get harsh. So, next test, I'd already listened to the stock chip versus the Sparkos in the AEMA A70. So I knew how much better they were than the stock chip, right? So I didn't feel the need to replicate this, because, like I said, I wanted to install the chips, kind of shuffle the amps around, and then just in case my brain tried to keep up with which one was in which amp, I put them both on the shelf, and then, every day or two, I'd swap them around a couple times or whatever, and by a week gone by, I had no idea whatsoever which chip was in which amp. So, same testing methodology, hooked up my tape deck, started listening to these, and again, without having any idea, I was pretty sure which one was the stock chip and which one was the Burson. There was that much difference. But when I started listening to the Sparkos versus the Burson, definitely is a difference. One of them had a lot more clarity and more detail, and it reminds me of the sound that I try to get out of my systems. And the best way I know to describe it is like you've heard an artist like in an indoor event, and then you hear the same artist at an outdoor event. That outdoor event sound is what I'm shooting for, where it's more like open and airy and just more like the speakers in the stereo just kind of disappear, and you can close your eyes and just visualize you're in a concert space. And one of the amps did that. The other one still sounded good, but it just didn't have that revealing kind of open sound to it. And of course, when I was sitting there listening, back and forth, and I did it about half a dozen times, going back and forth, and then, later in the day, I came back, did the same thing, and then I listened to the whole song, and then the whole song to kind of get, a real feeling for what I was hearing. And there was one that I definitely preferred. And when I was sitting there, of course, I'm trying to figure out which one I think is which. I'm trying to guess. And I was thinking, well, that open, airy one is probably the Burson Vivid, because, it's got that kind of vivid what I would think would be a vivid kind of a sound. But when I opened them up, it was the Sparkos. It definitely has an openness and a cleanness and a presentation that I prefer over the Burson Op Amp. And again, the other thing that it has going for it, apart from the sound, is it's a lot lower profile op amp, and it will fit inside almost any amp that the IC will. Obviously, not every amp. I mean, there's some that sure have their top like right up against the top of the, IC op amp, but it's going to fit in a lot of amps that the Burson won't. But yeah, if the Burson sounded that much cleaner than the Sparkos, I'd be like sawing a hole in the top of the amp so I could stick the Burson in it and have it coming out of the top of the amp or whatever I needed to do to make it fit. And I know people do that kind of thing. And you could do that. If you wanted to put a taller op amp in this thing, you could measure, find out where that little 8-pin socket is, and get a Dremel, cut little square holes over those sockets so you could, once you put it together, slide it in. It looks like these actually have switches on the front that won't let them power up unless they're in the case, and for good reason, that it needs the case and the thermal paste to the case to dissipate the heat so it doesn't smoke the chip amp. So I guess the final word is Sparkos wins. I mean, at least to me, it had a cleaner sound. It was more transparent, I think is a good way to describe it. Where, if you were looking for that kind of rolled off, maybe tubey kind of a sound that's more laid back, maybe with certain kinds of music, the Burson might win, but I just don't see it. I mean, for my listening preference, I 100% would go for the Sparkos. And given that the price point is almost identical, to me it's a no-brainer. So, appreciate that the Burson folks sent me a pair of those op amps to, review. And they're definitely an improvement over these little IC chips that come in these amps. So, don't think I'm saying that. For you folks that have Burson chips in your amps and you love them, I'm not saying they're not good. It's just Sparkos is like one step past what they sound like, in my subjective opinion. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little review. I think I kind of really went all out trying to figure out a way to A/B these without any kind of bias or expectation bias going into this, and I hopefully succeeded. And it was, to me, a very clear difference between the two. So anyway, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters and the other folks that support Skunky Designs. Thank you both to Burson and to Sparkos for sending me some op amps to put into these little Fozzy mono amps. And also thank you to Fozzy for sending me these to review and giving me a platform to be able to actually test this stuff, so you don't have to go buy this gear and give this stuff, a trial run. So yeah, if you're on a budget and you've got $500 to $1,000, kind of in that range, and you're watching my channel going, yeah, what tube amp should I get? Get this. If all you got is $500, don't buy some budget tube amp thinking you're going to get sound that you can get out of a pair of these, or that Yamaha A70 stereo, which I think is the better bargain. The other advantage the Yamaha A70 has over buying a pair of these mono amps, not only are you spending twice as much money getting 2 amps versus the one, I think the A70 may be a little more than each one of these is individually, but you save about $170, $180 from having to buy 4 op amps that these would require versus the two. And the final thing that I want to do is I do want to test or play around with these and probably do the same kind of mono back and forth thing and see how much difference a Sparkos op amp versus the IC chip has on that third op amp that I believe is involved with the XLR input. And that'll be in a future video. So again, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to all you folks that are supporting the channel. And until the next time, have a nice day.